3 days before my mother died, she gave me a name, just one name. She looked at me from her hospital bed and said, "You have to find him." I asked her who he was, but she didn't answer. Then she whispered something that I still think about today. "He knows the truth about you." I thought she was confused. I thought the medication was affecting her memory. But 6 weeks later, I found the man. And the first thing he said when he saw me was, "Your mother never told you, did she?" Hi everyone, my name is Ethan, and today I'm going to tell you about the strangest and most painful experience of my life. For most of my life, I believed I knew my mother. She was quiet, hard-working, and protective. She raised me alone after my father supposedly left when I was very young. I never asked too many questions. Whenever I asked about my father, my mother would simply say, "Some things are better left in the past." I accepted that answer, until the last few days of her life. My mother had been sick for several months. I visited her every evening after work. One Thursday night, I noticed she looked different. She seemed nervous. She reached under her pillow and pulled out a small piece of paper. There was a man's name written on it, Michael Harris. Under the name was an old address. I looked at her and asked, "Who is Michael?" She took a deep breath and said, "I knew him 30 years ago." I asked if he was a friend. She shook her head. "It's more complicated than that." Then she grabbed my hand. "Promise me you'll find him." I promised, but I still didn't understand why. Before I left that night, she said one more thing. "Don't tell him who you are until he tells you what happened." That sentence stayed in my mind. What happened? And why was she afraid of him? My mother died 12 days later. After the funeral, I almost forgot about Michael. I was exhausted. I was grieving. I wanted to return to normal life. But one night, I found the piece of paper again. I searched online. There were several people named Michael Harris, but none matched the age or location my mother had written down. I searched old public records, but I found nothing. Then I found an old newspaper archive. There it was, a photograph from 30 years earlier. Michael Harris. He had worked at a small construction company in our town, but the article wasn't about construction. It was about a house fire. The fire had destroyed a family home, and one person had died, a young woman. I stared at the photograph for several minutes. Something about the story felt wrong. The article mentioned that Michael had been questioned by police, but there was no arrest and no explanation. Just a short paragraph saying he had left town shortly afterward. I wondered if this was the secret my mother had been talking about. The old address led me to a small town several hours away. I almost turned around when I arrived. It felt ridiculous. I was searching for a man my mother hadn't seen in 30 years, a man connected to an old fire, a man who might not even be alive. But I knocked on the door. An elderly woman answered. I asked if Michael Harris lived there. She looked at me for several seconds. Then she said, "You're not his son, are you?" My heart stopped. I hadn't told her my name. I asked, "Why would you think that?" She didn't answer. Instead, she slowly closed the door. Then she opened it again and said, "He lives 2 streets away." She gave me an address. I thanked her and walked away, but one question wouldn't leave my mind. Why did she think I was his son? Michael was sitting on his front porch when I arrived. He looked much older than the photograph, grey hair, a thin face, and tired eyes. I introduced myself using only my first name. He stared at me. Then his face changed. It was subtle, but I saw it. He looked frightened. "Who sent you?" he asked. I said, "Nobody." He stood up. "Then why are you here?" I remembered my mother's instructions. I didn't tell him who I was. Instead, I asked, "Do you know a woman named Linda?" My mother's name. Michael became completely silent. Then he sat down again. "Where is she?" I didn't answer. He looked at me carefully. "She's dead, isn't she?" I nodded. Michael closed his eyes. For almost a minute, he said nothing. Then he whispered, "I knew this day would come." Michael invited me inside. We sat at a small kitchen table. He told me he had known my mother when they were both young. They had been close friends, very close. Then he said something that completely changed the story. "Your mother was going to marry me." I stared at him. That was impossible. My mother had never mentioned him. Michael continued. "She was pregnant." I felt my stomach tighten. I asked, "Pregnant with whose child?" He looked directly at me. "Mine." For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Then I laughed nervously. I thought he was making some terrible mistake. "My father was someone else," I said. Michael shook his head. "No." I stood up. "You're wrong?" He reached into an old cabinet and pulled out a photograph. It showed my mother when she was young. She was standing beside Michael. She was pregnant. On the back of the photograph was a date, 9 months before my birthday. I felt dizzy, but Michael wasn't finished. He told me that 30 years earlier, my mother had planned to leave town with him. They were going to start a new life together. But the night before they left, a terrible accident happened. Michael had been driving. His younger brother was in the car. They were involved in a crash, and his brother died. Michael survived. My mother blamed herself because she believed she had caused the accident. She disappeared from his life. She never contacted him again. But there was something even bigger. Michael said my mother had given birth to me. He had wanted to meet me, but she refused. She told him I was better off believing another man was my father. I couldn't understand. "Why would she do that?" I asked. Michael looked down and said, "Because she believed I would destroy your life." I thought that was the whole truth. It wasn't. Michael went upstairs and returned with an old box. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to my mother. He had written to her for years, but none had ever been answered. Then he showed me something else, a letter from my mother. It was dated only 6 months before she became sick. She had written, "Michael, I don't know how much time I have left. Ethan deserves to know the truth, but I'm afraid that if he learns everything, he will hate me." I read the letter twice. Then I noticed something strange. My mother had written another name, David. That was the man I had always believed was my father. Michael explained that David had known the truth. He had agreed to raise me as his own, but there was one condition. Michael could never contact me. David died when I was 8. My mother continued the lie for the rest of my childhood. I suddenly understood why she never spoke about my father. She wasn't hiding a stranger. She was hiding my real father. I was angry, not just with my mother, but with Michael and David and everyone who had made decisions about my life without asking me. I asked Michael why he hadn't fought harder to meet me. He looked at me and said, "Because your mother told me you were happy." I didn't know what to say. Then he added something that hurt even more. "She sent me one photograph of you every birthday." I stared at him. He had photographs of me growing up, my first school uniform, my 10th birthday, my graduation, and my first car. Pictures I had never known existed. Michael had watched my life from a distance, and I had spent my entire life believing nobody cared about the father who disappeared. Before I left, Michael gave me the box of letters. I didn't forgive my mother immediately. I was too angry. But as I read the letters over the next few weeks, my anger slowly changed. I realized my mother had made terrible choices, but she had also spent her entire life trying to protect me from pain. She wasn't perfect. She was afraid. And sometimes fear makes people make decisions they later regret. Michael and I stayed in contact. It wasn't easy. You can't build 30 years of a relationship in a few months. We had awkward conversations. We shared old photographs. He told me stories about my mother before I was born, and slowly he became part of my life. Not the father I had imagined, not a replacement for the man who raised me. Just Michael, the man my mother had asked me to find. Months later, I understood why my mother had waited until the end. She knew I deserved the truth, but she was afraid that the truth would destroy the life she had built for me. It didn't destroy my life. It changed it. And I learned something I will never forget. Sometimes the people who love us make decisions for us because they are afraid of what the truth might do. But even when the truth hurts, we deserve the chance to face it ourselves. My mother left me with many unanswered questions, but she also gave me one final gift. She gave me the chance to know where I came from. And sometimes, finding the truth about your past isn't about changing the past. It's about finally understanding the people who shaped your life.